You're quite quiet, Director Fall.
Let's see what's going on. I will speak straight at my mic. Is that better?
Under audio, there is under the audio settings, you can
Yeah.
you can increase the input level of your microphone.
Yeah, it's at the max.
There you go. That's better.
Oh, that's better. Okay.
Okay.
I will speak clearly and loudly.
Recording in progress.
All right, Chair, we do have a quorum, and Director Elliott will be joining us in a minute.
Okay. I will start the meeting then. We are welcome to the December 4th, 2024 Finance Committee meeting. We'll start with a land acknowledgement. I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered today on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Tla'amin Nation, as well as all Coast Salish First Nations on whose traditional territories we have the honor to live, including my home on Hwai'ete, also known as Laskiti Island. We have an agenda before us. Would someone like to move the agenda or make any amendments? Director Gisborne?
With the amendment of two documents, I sent them out by email. They were also included on the November Finance Committee agenda as well.
Okay, so with leave of, is there anyone opposed to just considering those as attachments as they were already provided? Okay, Director McCormick. Did you have your hand up, Director McCormick?
Second.
Oh, you're seconding it. Okay, you're seconding it. Okay, so is there any further discussion on the agenda? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? None opposed? Carried unanimously. Okay, we have minutes from November the 12th meeting. Are there any changes or omissions? And seeing none, would someone like to make a motion to adopt those? Director Lennox, Director McCormick, is there any discussion on those minutes? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? None opposed? Carried. Okay, we have no registered delegations. I don't see anyone in the room, but is there anyone in the room that is an unregistered delegation? I don't believe so. Okay, so we have no unfinished business. We have one item of correspondence from the archives, the Museum and Archives Society. Does anyone want to make any motions related to that? Okay, seeing no hands up, we will move on. Oh, Director McCormick.
Yes, I guess I'll pull that item 6.1.
Okay, so that'll be 7.1. Okay, Director McCormick, floor is yours.
Yeah, well, I'm just looking at the letter. The request is for permission to spend $6,000 for technical equipment, two computers and a printer scanner before the end of the year. And it's not going to cost us anything further. Capital purchases are already included in the budget. So I would move that we send a letter authorizing them to do this. Or that we direct the board to authorize the letter.
So the committee direct the board to authorize a letter to the Museum and Archives Society to authorize this expenditure.
Yeah.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Director Lennox, discussion on sending a letter or recommending to the board to send a letter. Director Lennox?
Thank you, Chair. Just some education. Is this probably from Ms. Green, and is this a normal way for the library to request this type of equipment? Or sorry, museum. Thank you.
Ms. Green.
Request this type.
Ms. Green.
Thank you, Chair. Through the chair, there was some discussion with the museum in the past where they, weren't always they weren't really calling things capital that we thought should be capital. So we did have that discussion when they did their shelving unit, and so through that process, we did ask that if they did want to purchase capital equipment or anything capital, that they would come to the board and request that.
Thanks for the reminder.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other, Director Gisborne?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry. Yeah, if serves correctly, the museum was not eligible for capital expenses under our service establishment bylaw. I think it was last month or the month before we updated and changed our service establishment bylaw so that capital projects are eligible, but they do have to go through a request. It's only a $6,000 request. I'm comfortable with that, but it does also bring up the previous discussion around, board appointments. And reading the correspondence that went back and forth between our staff and the museum was they didn't feel it necessary to have a voting member on their board. But what I have heard is, a non-voting individual from our board might be a good idea because it seems like we're going to be getting, more requests like this. And I just think it'd be nice if a member of our board was kind of a point of contact. But I think that's something for another day. The item before us, I think, I'm comfortable with it, but this is a result of us changing our service establishment bylaw to allow for capital, and now we are getting a request for capital. And it's not anything too crazy. It's not like they're trying to build a brand new museum or anything. It's $6,000 for some computers, so I'm okay. Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome, and it does help keep us informed. So I think this process is useful for me at least. Okay, is there any further discussion on this item before I call the vote? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed? Carried. Okay, so we're moving on to reports. First up is 8.1, the BC Hydro ReGreening Grant. What's the board, the committee's wish? Is there any first? I guess if there's any. Okay, there's movement to do it. Is there any? It's pretty straightforward. Is there a seconder for that? Director Brander, is there questions or comments? Okay, seeing no debate on this, I will then call the question. All those in favor? None opposed? Carried. Okay, 8.2, cemetery fees and charges, bylaw amendment. Maybe first, if there's any questions for staff, Director Elliott.
Thank you, Director Fall. Chair. My question actually wasn't anything to do with the fees or the changes. That all seems quite straightforward. My question was, if somebody can't afford fees in a cemetery, what happens? Is there a program that allows forgiveness for that? It seems like people should be able to get in the cemetery even if they can't afford to.
Mr. Devereaux, what's our process on that?
Hi, through the chair. Yes, the ministry takes care of that. The province funds those burials for people who don't have the financial means. They don't provide full casket services, but cremated remains are they pay for cremated remains to be interned.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any other questions? So then now we don't have a motion yet. Would someone like to make a motion related to this item? Director Gisborne, the motion in the agenda. Director Elliott, discussion on the motion. Director Lennox.
Oh, sorry, I was just seconding it.
Oh, you're seconding it. Okay, I don't know whose hand up was first. I think Director Elliott was there. Yes. Okay, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? None opposed? Carried. Very good. 8.3, Director's Remuneration and Expense Amendment Bylaws. Are there any questions for staff before we make a motion? And if none, would someone like to make the motion? Director McCormick?
Well, I actually had a question.
Oh, question. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, it's yours.
My question is to staff, do we need to do the comprehensive review? Is there a need for that in the next calendar year? Because that is an optional, thing at our discretion. So the question is, do we need to do this?
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, through the chair. No, the board doesn't have to do it. As you said, Director McCormick, it is an option. So the board can decide whether they want a comprehensive review or whether they just want to continue with the CPI increases.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Director McCormick? Okay, Director Gisborne, you had a question?
Yeah, just been thinking about a lot of discussion that happens around pretty much all elected assemblies when it comes to remuneration. I like the idea of if we are going to do like a comprehensive review and change the director's remuneration in any significant way, which I would hope that's the result of the comprehensive review, that it would come into effect for the next elected term, which I believe would be 2026. So if it's okay with the assembly, I would be actually happy to move motion, but the last part change 2025 budget to 2026 budget. So that way it would be the year of the election, we would do the review, and then whatever changes are made, it would apply to the next term, if that makes sense. How's that for a thought?
Well, we don't have a motion on the table yet, so that was questions, Director McCormick, and that's an option for sure. Director McCormick?
Okay, I think Ms. Greenan wanted to say
Oh,
something.
sorry, Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. Through the chair, I just wanted to mention that the reason that we actually changed the policy so that it was done in the year preceding the elections, so that it wasn't, it wasn't interfering with the whole process when we purposely didn't want it to happen in the election year.
Right. That makes sense. So, because if we did it in 2026, it would be rolling out as the election was rolling out, and it becomes a political issue. Okay, so let me pin this again so I can see. Is there further questions? Director McCormick, thank you, and then Director
Thank you.
Director Elliott.
Okay, do we know, because I didn't find this anywhere, if our remuneration is comparable to other regional districts of the same size? Because if it is, then I'm at a loss to see the reason for the review. So to help me make up my mind about that, is our remuneration, typical from what a regional district of our size would expect?
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. The last review was completed in 2019. So at that time, they were comparable, but we don't know what's happened since then. And and staff haven't done any comparisons preceding this report.
Thank you.
Director Elliott.
So I would be perfectly comfortable skipping the review altogether this term if that's, to save money or what have you and not do it. But if the board thought it was a good idea to do them regularly, at least once per term, I think this 2025 is the right year because you gather all your information, you get your recommendations. Anything you change can be changed for the next term if that's what you like. But those are all at the director's, the board's discretion. And so I think this is the year to put it in the budget and do it if it's going to get done at all. So that's just what I think.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? We don't yet have a motion on the table. Would someone like to put forward a motion, either the one in the package or possibly one of at least the first two clauses?
I would move the first two clauses and then we could decide on the third one later.
Okay, thank you. So there's for the first two clauses, which is 2.8% increase due to CPI, and then forwarding it to the December board meeting. Seconded by Director McCormick. Discussion on that element of it. I just like to say I think that's a very modest increase. It would be unlikely in my mind that other regional districts wouldn't be at least going up with inflation. It seems standard. Everything else does. So I'm fully in support of this motion. Any other discussion on this? Okay, I'll call the question on the first two clauses. Oh, Ms. Greenan, you have a comment.
Sorry, I don't have a, sorry, Chair. I don't actually have anything to say on these two, but I did want to mention something on the next one.
Okay, well, we'll call the vote and then I'll ask for a comment. Okay, so calling the vote on the first two clauses. All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed? Okay, Ms. Greenan, yet before we get a motion, you had comments related to the review?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Through the chair, I just wanted to mention that we did look at the travel, the per diem rates, like the meal allowances, and they do seem to vary from what other regional districts are paying. So if the board doesn't do, opts not to do the comprehensive review, you may want to just have staff do a review of the meal allowances, the per diem rates.
Okay, thank you. So that would look, instead of comprehensive review, it would say something like review of the per diem and travel rates. Okay, so that we don't have a motion on the table. Would someone like to make a motion? Is there an interest in doing either a comprehensive review or a review of the per diem and travel rates? Once, going twice. Director Gisborne.
I'll move the motion in the package for the comprehensive review in 2025.
Okay, so there's a seconder for that. I don't see anyone. Director Elliott. Yep. Okay, so that's on the table. So doing a comprehensive review in 2025. Discussion on this item. Director Gisborne?
Yeah, thanks. For the motion to get us to discuss something. We could amend it to just be related to the meal and incidental rates. It does make me think, though, about the comprehensive review, because I brought this up previously when discussing our meeting schedules. For those of us that are, not independently wealthy or retired, attending these meetings in the middle of the day, a lot of us can actually lose money as a result of participating. And I brought this up in the past where, if we're going to keep having midday meetings, it really puts those of us that are working or, still need to work at a disadvantage. And I'm wondering if maybe part of the comprehensive review will include, when those are, say, under 65, that their salary be jumped up to reflect the disadvantage that they're being put into. That can be seen as a barrier for, young working folks to participate around this board table after the next election.
Thank you. I'll turn that into a question for Ms. Greenan, because I don't know if having an age break would be possible. So, Ms. Greenan, would it be even possible to have an age break in the bylaw, or would that be considered discriminatory?
Thank you, Chair. Through the chair, I'm not sure. I think that's a legal question.
Right.
So I don't really know.
Personally, I think that's difficult, because imagine someone who's 68 who still has to work, who wants to. So I think it gets really challenging to have an age limit in there. Myself. Director Elliott.
I think that a comprehensive review and a report every once in a while, depending on the methodology you use. I mean, often it's the data gathering is around comparisons of what's being done. I wouldn't mind seeing data gathered around, interviews with folks to determine how much time they actually put in, and comparing that to the service, we're getting paid to versus the service. Some information around how much time is it taking for people, and there might be an average we could use, because I think most folks who aren't doing this job have no idea what it takes and how much it goes into it. And a report that actually identifies that, whether it impacts how much we're paying or not, I think is valuable to governance, so that people coming in who run for office have more information about what that is. And when we're making decisions about what remuneration should be, it's based on some information about how much time are people putting in, and what does it take to do this job. Because there's very little of that information out there, and most people learn by doing, and I think we could get it in a report somewhere, and I think that could be part of a review. That's just my thoughts.
Thank you, Director Elliott. Is there any further discussion? Director Lennox.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I guess I'm trying to be always cognizant of the taxpayer, and so before us that we've already voted on was like, sorry, that's okay. Scared me. Roughly $5,000 to $6,000, I think, or $5,060 for the CPI increase, basically, that we just voted on, and then now proposed $15,000 for the study. And so, in my mind, I appreciate the objectives, but really handled the pay issue, and now we're looking at sort of what are the other issues that affect remuneration, and it's our travel. So I think I'm just a little torn to spend $20,000 in 2025 instead of $5,000, and maybe focus on those other costs that we know about. I do appreciate totally what you're saying, because as we've had our discussions in the past, those other impacts harder to quantify. Maybe my question to Ms. Greenan is the $15,000, that's probably just an estimate for a consultant. Is you could just
Ms. Greenan?
Now we got
thank
there.
you. Thank you. Through the chair. Yes, that is just an estimate. We don't know what the actual cost of a review might be.
Director Southcott.
Thank you, Chair. So I wonder if the review only covered expenses and mileage, for example, if that wouldn't reduce cost.
Ms. Greenan, how much do you think it might be if we were to just do that part?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, definitely. If we were just to do that part, just just a mileage and travel review could be done by staff. Don't think that would need to go up to an outside consultant. That's a little bit, less of, it's much less complicated.
Director Gisborne.
You're a little quiet, but I think I heard you.
Director Gisborne, it's yours.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd be happy to put forward an amendment, remove comprehensive from comprehensive review and substitute it with meeting allowances. But I think that might be a little challenging because then the motion also has the $15,000. So would it be better, like a question with the corporate officer, do we cancel this one and do a different one, or?
Corporate officer?
Thank you through the chair. I just suggest either withdrawing this motion, voting it down, but withdrawing it allows you to revisit it again, easier, and then proposing a new motion just to review those aspects of the travel.
Okay, Director Gisborne, would you like to withdraw?
Yes, I would like to move that we withdraw the motion.
Okay, with anyone opposed to that, corporate officer?
Thank you, Chair. You just need everybody at the table to agree to withdraw.
Yeah, that's what I was asked. So yeah, is everyone agreeing? Yeah. So before you put your next motion for Director Gisborne, maybe a question for Ms. Green. And what would we be able to change? Would it be appropriate to change the 15,000 to a lower amount? And what would that be if it was put forward just for the travel and per diems?
Need anything there for travel.
Yeah, if it's just, sorry, through the chair, thank you. If it was just to check on the travel rates, that could be done by staff. So I don't think we would need an outside consultant for that.
Okay, great. So that may help with the corporate officers typing up a suitable version. See if that meets what Director Gisborne was going to move.
I believe our corporate officer is currently reading my mind, and I hope not.
That way you want to move, Director Gisborne?
Yeah, I'll move that.
Okay, is there a seconder for that? I can't see the room, so maybe say, oh, that's Director Lennox, I believe. Okay, now I got the room back again. Okay, so is there discussion on the motion on the table now, which is just to review those items at no extra budget cost? Seeing no hands up, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed? Carried. Okay, so we're on to item 8.4, Fire Services Capital Asset Management. We have a number of motions that are separate. They don't have ands between them, and we have. So I'll start with a set of open the round for a round of questions. Mr. Toms is on the line here, so if there's any questions around in general, and then we can ask questions as the motions come forward. Okay, so the first item is first motion is to accept this report for information. Is there a motion? Is there a mover for the item 1? Does anyone want to move item 1? Oh, can you hear me?
We're thinking.
Oh, you're thinking. Okay, the first item is that the committee recommend the board accept for information the capital asset replacement plan as presented. Director Brander.
I'll make the motion.
Okay, is there a seconder for that? Director Lennox. Okay, discussion on this. And of course, it'll be subject to any changes we make coming with the subsequent items. Okay, so is there any discussion? Seeing no hands up, I will call the question. All those in favor? None opposed, carried. Okay, so the second item, I would actually like to move that it be postponed until the January 2025 Finance Committee meeting. And if I get a seconder, I will explain. Okay, seconded by Director Brander. So clearly there's a big gap between the LIVFD reserves and looming apparatus and fire hall needs. so I can understand the basis of these recommendations in terms of sustainable financing of the service. However, the dramatic increases of even the low end of these proposals exceeds the sustainable capacity of the taxpayers. These financial challenges have built up over several decades and will take time to resolve. Let me put some of these amounts in perspective. Based on draft 1 of the financial plan in this agenda, Lesquity represents about 3% of the QRD tax base. That is the proportion that Lesquity taxpayers contribute to region-wide services such as general administration. The first table on page 14 of the staff report indicates a range of borrowing options to raise $1 million for apparatus. The low end of $200,000 may not seem like so much, but would be equivalent to borrowing over $6.8 million for a region-wide service. The high end of $800,000 would be equivalent to borrowing over $27 million for a region-wide service. While proper asset management is clearly very important, an underlying issue is that Lesquity residents can't afford to purchase 2 new apparatus in one step. One way to mitigate this would be to purchase used vehicles. Lesquity is considered as unprotected by the Fire Underwriter Survey due to several reasons that are not likely to change in the foreseeable future. While this has downsides for anyone who wants home insurance, we should at least take advantage of one potential upside: the ability to purchase good used apparatus for which values drop precipitously as they approach the Fire Underwriter Survey age limits. Now on to reserves. The second table on page 14 of the staff report indicates a range of proposed reserve contributions that would be funded by taxation. The low end of $200,000 would be equivalent to raising over 6.8 million tax dollars each year for a region-wide service. If that were feasible at the region scale, we could pay off the Resource Recovery Center loans in a couple years, but it isn't. The high end of $350,000 would be equivalent to raising nearly $12 million per year for a region-wide service. To support such large increases in taxation would definitely require significant increases in the LIVFD requisition limits. Last year, I consented on behalf of the electors to increase the limit by about 50%, from a bit over $1.3 per $1,000 of assessed value to $2, increasing the tax ceiling to the recommended level of over $3.3 per $1,000 assessed value would be an increase of more than 150% in 2 years to a level multiple times higher than all the other regional fire departments. Keep in mind that the 500 full-time Lesquity residents have the lowest per capita income of any electoral area in the QRD. These numbers just aren't feasible, and I'm not willing to approve such a dramatic increase in the requisition limit on behalf of the Lesquity direct electors, at least without some time and consultation for the public, and hence I would like to postpone this until the January meeting to give some time for the public to digest this, at least. And if there's is there any further discussion on that? Seeing no hands, I will then, Director Gisborne?
No, I was getting ready to vote, sorry.
I'm getting ready to vote. Okay, I'll call the vote then. All those in favor of postponing? None opposed, carried. Okay, so the item 3 relates to Malaspina Volunteer Fire Department. What would the committee like to do with that one? Is there a mover of that, or Director Gisborne?
I would like to postpone this item as well. The same meeting of the Lesquity Island Fire Department.
Okay, so postponement to January Finance Committee. Is there a seconder for that motion to postpone? Director Lennox. Discussion on a motion to postpone. Director Gisborne?
Yeah, good report. Brings it to the attention of both the board and I'm sure members of the public of the situation that we're facing in relation to fire department apparatus and fire halls. As I understand it, Malaspina, we do get, benefits on our insurance, which, means that when a fire apparatus comes to the 20-year end of its life, we can extend that, as I understand, a few more years. But when the apparatus comes to the end of its life, got to get paid for. The reason I really want to postpone this is community works funds can be used to offset a lot of these costs in relation to fire halls and fire apparatus. And with the motion that we passed about partnering with the municipality for their community works funds or whatever else, I think when we hear back from the municipality, if they decide, thanks for the offer, but no thanks, then that will mean that the residents of area B and C will have the community works funds available to try and offset some of these big ticket costs. Because, you know, it's not all of area B and all of area C that pay for Malaspina volunteer fire protection. It's a much smaller portion of the overall geographical area. So I think my residents get a much better bang for their buck by having the community works funds going towards things like the fire hall and the fire protection apparatus rather than going to region-wide services. But that was the decision of the day, and I think we're still waiting to hear back. And I think also there's going to be members of the public wondering, you know, a bit about these numbers and these details. And I really am thankful for our staff for bringing this information forward. But at this time, I'm not prepared to go one way or the other at today's meeting because it's there's a big item. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Is there any further discussion on postponing this item? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? None opposed? Carried. Okay, number 4, related to Savory Island Fire Protection Service. Director Lennox?
Yeah, following on the theme, Chair, I'm making a motion to do the same thing and postpone.
Postpone to the Finance Committee.
Seconder, I'll speak to that.
Director Lennox, floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Just quickly, good points made already, and really mentioned in our last topic, impact of taxation and $221 average increase for folks in my area, you know, is substantial. And I just need a little more time to digest this. I really, again, do appreciate staff's work, because what this is showing us and our citizens is that asset management is the real deal, and we can't keep kicking things down the road. So, you know, prepared to take action on this, but I want to, you know, flush this out a bit more.
Yeah, quite right. I agree completely. Is there any other discussion on this postponement motion? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? None opposed, carried. And number 5, which is Northside. Director Lennox?
Ditto. Sorry, I make a motion to postpone.
Postpone, and yeah, seems to be a theme here. So is there any discussion on postponing this one also? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? None opposed. And I would like to move to postpone item 6 as well for similar reasons, Director McCormick. And I'd just like to also thank staff. A lot of work goes into this, and it's, you know, it's no slight on staff at all. These are as Director Lennox said, this asset management is the real deal. You need to decide what you're doing. You need to be clear, and you need to figure out how to pay for it. The fact that things got you know, a bit behind, or a lot behind in some cases, is just neither here nor there. We got to find a way to resolve this, and you know, it's a matter of balancing the time frame for that. So long-term planning for fire halls on Lasqueti is really important, and the topic of replacing the main hall on Lasqueti is not new. It came up 10 years ago, but there hasn't been any significant public consultation since then, of which I'm aware, and there's been consultation on other things. And you know, given the cost of replacing a fire hall, it's not hard to predict that this will get community attention. So we got to make sure the community has time to have their attention put on it before they feel like decisions are already being made. I acknowledge that the fire underwriter survey requires replacement after certain time limits. However, given how the fire underwriter survey sees, or rather doesn't see, LIVFD, the time limits should not be a primary concern for the Lasqueti Hall. The primary concern should be about the should include the functional longevity of the existing hall. How good is it? How long can it be stretched out so we can do proper planning? Of course, sooner is better, but you know, from a service point of view, but longer is better from a taxpayer point of view. So how can we balance that need to save reserves and the capacity of the taxpayer? So that's the reasons why I'd like to postpone it, give a bit more time, same as the other items. So any further discussion on this? Seeing no hands, I will call the question. All those in favor? None opposed, carried. Okay, thank you. So now we're on to the financial plan draft 1. So I see a few motions, but as per our past practice, I would first like to hand over to Ms. Greenan, because I expect, may have a presentation for us.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I do have a presentation, so I'll share my screen right here.
After the presentation, I'll offer a round of questions before we get into motions and then motions.
Sorry about this. I'm just. So if everyone can see so if everyone can see my screen, you should see the presentation, the PowerPoint.
Yep, shows up for me.
Okay, thank you. So I'm pleased to present draft 1 of the 2025 to 2029 financial plan. During this presentation, I will review the strategy that was used to, I will review the strategy that was used to develop the financial plan, the assumptions that went in to develop it. I will then provide an overview of the requisition change and some of the service level changes that impact the requisition change. I'll also overview the Savory Fire requisition limit there to support the plan as presented at draft 1. The Savory Fire requisition will need a requisition increase. The last requisition increase was in 2020, so it has been 5 years. However, the limit, because the assessed values changed, have changed upwardly, we would need approval of the inspector for the requisition limit increase that is required. Then I will review the 2024 budget amendment that you saw in the recommendation for the waste management service. Then I will review the capital plans and then the residential tax rates per 100,000 and the cost per average home based on draft 1. And then I'll open the floor to any questions that you may have. So the budget strategy, in July, the budget starts and it's all based on supporting the 2023 to 2027 strategic plan. We've also tried to reduce the reliance on prior year surplus. And the reason for that is that because our services are all siloed, when we count on a large prior year surplus, if there is no surplus in the subsequent year, then there's a need to increase the taxes dramatically. So we tried to reduce the reliance on prior year surplus so that the services are more sustainable based on their current year revenues. Then we've separated operations and capital, which is the norm now. And that just makes it easier to see, okay, this is what we're having as a taxation increase for operations. And then any capital is now funded through reserve contributions or borrowing and not generally directly from taxation. And then I'll review the reserve contributions. The assumptions for this plan are that we do zero-based budgeting. So the operational costs are based on specific estimates of what the cost will be in 2025. And then if we don't have a specific estimate, we would use like a 3 to 5% inflationary increase on those costs. In some cases, there are different increases. For example, insurance, we put a 10 to 15% increase. And that is because the rates increase based on the market, but also the value of the assets have to increase annually to make sure that we're covering them adequately. As a return on investments, I've estimated 4%, but I think in this draft 2, I will downgrade that to 2.5% to 3%, just because our returns are starting to reduce with the interest rate reductions. For CPI, we're projecting a 3% change for the BC CPI, and future borrowing we're projecting 5 to 6%, just because some of the borrowing isn't in 2025, some of it is planned for 2026 and beyond. For payroll allocations, the payroll right now is based on the 2023 time and motion study, so actual payroll will be allocated to different services based on the 2024 time and motion study. And union payroll, a potential increase hasn't been determined yet. So the overview of this financial plan is that we're projecting a 12.59% requisition increase. We're looking at about a 5% average general inflationary increase. We're saying 5% just because, as I said, just because the CPI is looking like it will be 3%, that doesn't impact all of the regional district's costs. You know, a lot of our costs are related to to labor and transportation, so they don't follow the normal basket of CPI goods. And then there are increases in some of the budgets that are above the 5% average, and most of those are because there's I've outlined those on page 8 of your agenda. Often they're because there's a service level change, like we're implementing something new that wasn't that needs to be done, but it's not the norm. It's not our normal static level of service. And then also we have some planned debt increases, which increase the budgets above inflation. And then in some cases, the 2024 surplus is projected to be lower than what we brought forward from 2023. So that means that we need to fund more of that from taxation. As we mentioned in the fire services presentation that you just saw, the fire service exceeds the requisition limit by 57,788 based on this draft of the financial plan. So an increase from 6.6968 cents per $100,000 of residential tax is we need to increase it to 90 cents per $1,000 to support the current operations. And inspector approval will be required because that will be above the 25% approval fee limit, free limit. And even though the rate might not be and the reason for that is because as I said, the assessments have increased. So the rate has to increase above in order to get us enough funding to support the service. So capital plans in the regional services, I broke it out by what's new capital and what's upgrades. In the regional services, most of the capital is for replacements, renewals or replacements. The only new capital that we have are Shelter Point Park, completion of a new well. And at Clahaman, we're looking at installing a well supply line so that in the future we could have flush washrooms at that site. And at the Texada Metal Transfer Station, there's an upgrade of $96,000 in the capital budget. Most of the budget for the regional services is replacements. So in general administration, we have a pooled diesel backhoe that's used across many different services, and replacement of the concession roof and the sprinkling system at Palm Beach Park, and replacement of the upper water reservoir line at Shelter Point Park, replacement of the mausoleum windows at the Paul River Cemetery, and replacement of the mobile and the EOC generators for the regional emergency services. The capital plans for the electoral areas, most of it is new, and that is largely because it involves the Northside Recreation Center upgrade or expansion, which is largely grant funded. It's 73% grant funded. And at Malaspina, Skeety, Savory, and Northside, there are some new equipment that that are new to the service, but they are needed. At Lund Sewer, we're planning on implementing a SCADA monitoring system. And at Savory Marine, there's a wharf fire protection that has been requested. Capital plans for the electoral areas for replacements is $960,420. And that includes Malaspina, replacement of the wood deck at Hall Number 1, a replacement of SCBA equipment. Laskeety Fire Department, there's a replacement of a drying cabinet and water tanks. Savory Volunteer Fire Department, replacement of engine 21. The cost that you see in draft 1, we noticed there was an error on the cost, so I need to update that cost in draft 2, but there won't be any change to the requisition for that because that's funded through reserves and borrowing that was already included in that capital plan. And at Northside Volunteer Fire Department, the same thing. The engine 13, the cost isn't correct, but it will need to be updated in draft 2, but no change to the requisition for that. And Northside Volunteer Fire Department, we're also replacing the turnout gear washer and the SCBA equipment. In Lund Sewer, replacing the pump. Texada Recreation Service, there is the tennis court is going to be resurfaced, and there are plans for the community hall renovations. So what this all comes down to is residential tax rates per $100,000 range between, for the city of Paul River, that would, the 2025 plan at draft 1 means about $97 per 100,000, which is $11 change from that of 2024. Electoral area A, $341, a change of $33 from 2024. Savory Island, $220, which is a change of $30 from 2024. Area B, $220, which is a change of $22 from 2024. Area C, $231, which is a $25 change from 2024. Area D, $230, which is a $25 change from 2024. And Area E, $314, which is also a $25 change from 2024. So the cost per average home ranges from $571.70 in the city, and that's about $64 on the average, a change of $64 on the average home from that of 2024. And then the highest one is in Area E, which is $1,704, which is a change of $139 per average home in Area E. So that concludes my presentation, and I'll have draft 2 at the January Finance Committee meeting, and then the final at the February 2025 Finance Committee meeting, and then we're planning for adoption in February 2025. I'll stop the sharing and then just ask, does anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Green. So I'll do a round of questions, and then we can maybe consider the first motion in the package and then take it from there. So Director Elliott.
Thank you. So a couple of questions. First of all, the table that's outlining kind of the changes in general administration and so forth, I was finding it really difficult to read because it's quite blurry in my package.
Yeah.
And so if you could review those for me so I could understand, like, because general administration operating costs went up significantly, and I just kind of trying to figure out if some of those are new services and I can't really read them.
Page 8 of 50.
Thank you. And I can share my screen as well because they're a bit easier to read in this format.
Makes sense.
Sorry, Chair, through the chair.
No, go ahead. Yeah, no, as I was waiting for you to share. Yes, please.
Okay. So yes. So what I was trying to outline here is, trying to go on the level of, look at the level of service. So a normal 5% increase because our costs aren't really hugely large. So a 5% increase would have meant about $107,190, but we're actually we're looking at a $458,000 increase. And some of the main drivers of that are we need to hire a Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy consultant just to handle the Freedom of Information requests that we have been receiving. And we also have a need to hire a human resources consultant. And that's we're projecting about $185,000 for that. We need to implement endpoint detection and response software. That is for cybersecurity. And that's about $68,000. And then there's also a need to upgrade our electronic records management system. And so we're looking at a laser fiche system for $70,000. And we also need to change our phone system to TELUS Business Connect, because from what I understand, the current phone system will not be supported in the future. So that's the general administration increases.
We have some comment on the HR consultant. So that's different than what we normally do, and what's that about?
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. If I could direct that question, please, to Michelle Jones.
Ms. Jones?
Yes, thank you. So that is, we do actually not have. We do have about most of the human resource work handled by department. But in fact, over this last year, I've been dedicating and our and that's not sustainable. The business of the organization, rather than hiring person, we prefer to budget it and determine what. But the difference between hiring consultant, they charge a higher rate.
Jones, for some reason you're going in and out. I thought it might have been on my end, but I just got a note. TV that's Paul.
Sorry, I'll speak up.
Okay, thanks.
So, yeah, so we examined both establishing a staff position and hiring a consultant. We would prefer to go with a consultant or a contractor, just to determine what our definitely do have this. Okay.
Right, sure, still going in and out.
Then I have one more question about the backhoe. Did I ask that question too?
You can go right ahead.
Thank you. So my question is, for the pooled backhoe, if we decided not to replace it or have it, what impact would that have? So would we then have to transfer that to contracting out to contracts, and would there be, what would they, like, how would that impact the budget, the operations?
Ms. Green, is that for you or that be for Mr. Devereaux?
Thank you, Chair. I think that would be for Mr. Devereaux. Thank you.
Mr. Devereaux, are you on the call? How would it impact you to not get a backhoe replacement? Our operations, I should say.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, we're in a tight position right now with our backhoe. We use it considerably, mostly at the cemetery, where it's used, of course, to dig graves. But it's also used across the regional parks and our other properties. Our current backhoe now needs a major overhaul, repairs, to the point where it is not worth doing this repair, because the cost is just it's just outrageous what they want to repair the backhoe. It is over 15 years old. It's served its purpose. The new backhoe we're looking at is slightly smaller than the one we have now, but more easily transported from site to site because of the size. Currently, the backhoe broke down. We are renting a mini excavator to dig graves at the cemeteries.
And so do we know how many hours on average we use the backhoe per year?
Mr. Devereaux?
Through the chair, I don't have that figure offhand, but I can get that back to the board.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Director Elliott. Is that you're done with your questions? Ms. Greening, can maybe stop sharing screen so I could see the board again. The committee, thank you. So, is there any other questions around the table? Director McCormick.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. First of all, the presentation for draft one is quite different than the draft one presentation that we've seen in previous years because of the lack of the the detailed breakdowns for each service. So I'm just wondering why, and I appreciate the fact that you have provided that information, so thank you for doing that, but I'm just wondering why it wasn't included in draft one of the package. The package of stuff for draft one.
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. We were just trying to show things at a high level. So what I did include instead of all of the details, we just thought that the details weren't, we found that people were kind of getting confused by all of those little details. What do they all mean? So what we did provide instead was there is a table on page, to find it here. Instead, what we provided is, it's at the very end on page 35 of the package. And it shows like, so for example, for general admin, it shows how much there's 22.7 million in taxation, how much is government grants and interest. And then the next page shows all of the expenses. So we thought we would break it down more of a summarized version. So like operating expenses is 4.0 million. And then capital, debt principal, debt interest, reserve transfers, non-stat reserve transfers. We just broke it down that way, thinking that that might be more meaningful to people that looked at it. And then if the directors wanted all of those, the individual lines, that we would provide those as a separate package.
Director McCormick?
Okay. Chair, thank you. I, for one, find the old format much clearer and easier to follow. So that's just my opinion there. I have two specific questions then about first of all, the middle transfer station on Texada, the $90,000 in capital. What is that for?
Would that be for Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. I think that should be directed to Patrick Devereaux, Manager of Operational Services.
Mr. Devereaux, what's the plans for the metal transfer station?
So that figure has been on the plan for probably about 3 years now, and it's improvements to the metal transfer station. The report sent to the board probably in about 3 years ago. I cannot remember the exact improvements that were scheduled in that report. But it's about cleaning up and streamlining operations there.
Yeah, I believe that was for a building to house batteries so that there was no battery acid leaching into the ground. So I'm kind of curious what refining operations means. But I'll carry on. The $88,000 in capital funding for the Texada Community Hall, which is in the Recreation Commission budget. Now, the Recreation Commission has not yet discussed the building assessments of the community hall and the old school. So I'm just wondering what that 88,000 was based on, because there's going to be significantly higher costs coming down the road for that building. And I'm just wondering, since the commission hasn't discussed it yet, what that 88,000 is for.
Mr. Devereaux?
Yes, through the chair. Director Cormick's right. The Texada Island Recreation Commission has not seen the budget. We know that there are issues with the hall. This figure is to help spread out some of those repairs that are going to be necessary to move forward, so that we don't have all of our improvements or fixes in one current year. So we're trying to spread that out over a series of years. The budget is draft one, and there may be changes, of course, once the board gets input from their advisory committee.
Because one of the options that the commission would be considering would be tearing down the old school and the community hall in favor of construction of a new facility. I don't think the commission would go for that, but in the event that they did, why would we budget 88,000 for renovations for a building that we conceivably would be tearing down?
Is that a rhetorical question, or would you want Mr. Devereaux? Mr. Devereaux, do you have a response for that? Ms. Greenan.
Thank you, Chair. Often what I recommend to managers is that they budget, if they think something might need to be done, because if we don't have it in the budget, then we have to go through the amendment process. So I think this was, that could have been part of it, is just to make sure that we have some funds in there if we do need to do those upgrades.
Thank you.
So on to Director Gisborne.
Can I request a 5-minute bio break?
You can request it. Is everyone okay for taking a 5-minute break?
Sure.
We'll do a 5-minute break and we'll continue.
Here.
Yeah. We will have more fun with budgets. So thank you for that. We're all more comfortable now. And is there any further questions? I have a couple, but I'll wait till the end. Director Gisborne.
Recording yet?
To wait for recording.
Yeah.
Chair, we
Yes?
just need 1 minute to get the recording
Recording
started.
in progress.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. We're back in, everybody's here.
Okay, we're back in session and carrying on with questions with Director Gisborne.
Thank you, Chair. I guess my question kind of piggybacks onto Director McCormick's about the more detailed financial plan that we're used to in the past. If the Finance Committee and the board want to use like the old model, would that require a motion from the board to direct staff to, have the more detailed financial plan like we used to?
Well, I'll ask that question, send that question over to Ms. Greenan. First, you can answer, and I have a comment on it. Ms. Greenan?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yes, I think that a motion would be in order.
And to that end, Director Gisborne, I have a motion to that end prepared that I would like to put forward at an appropriate time.
Look at this, we're telepathic around here.
Waiting for the right moment, but yes, carry on if you have further questions on.
I'm okay for now, Chair.
Okay for now. Is there any other questions around the table? Director Elliott.
So I noticed there's recommendations to make changes to draft 1 based on decisions of the city around the Community Works Fund, the proposed option. Is there a reason we need to do that before we get a decision back from the city, or would postponing that to after the decision be okay?
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. We actually need that for year end. For our year end, we have to show where the funding is coming from. So this would just be a budget amendment. And then if the funding changed in, when we do get the decision in 2025, then we can amend the budget again. But this will get us through our year end and allow us to do our financial statements.
Okay, so you need the placeholder right away.
Yes.
Further questions before we get into motion? So what I propose we do is we consider motion recommendation 1, which is to accept the draft 1 as guiding principles, and then we'll have a draft 2. Then I'll put forward the motion I prepared for related to the details, and then we can consider the second motion in the agenda, and then any other motions that are there pertinent, I should say. So would someone like to put forward the first recommendation to accept draft 1? Director Gisborne? Director Lennox, thank you. Is there any discussion on this? Thank you very much. Then I'll call the question. All those in favor? None opposed, carried. So I just put forward a motion. I sent it to our corporate officer, and I'll read it out. So I'd like to make the motion that the committee recommend that the board request staff to include detailed budgets by service in all future financial plan drafts, as was done in draft 1 of the 2024 to 2028 financial plan. That means last year. So that's the motion, Director Gisborne. Thank you. While the corporate officer is digesting that, I'll speak on it. I acknowledge the significant effort that goes into preparing the budget and thank staff for all the work that's been done and for considering ways to help the committee understand the big picture. I actually like some of the summary information that's added. I think that is helpful. However, from my perspective, the details for each service that we received in the past are important for me to understand the big picture. Actually, I can put together the big picture from those details. It helps me. And without those details, I actually end up having more questions because I don't really know what even to ask. So I would like to thank Ms. Greenan for providing me with those details. I was the one who requested those details, and Ms. Greenan provided them, and they're very useful for me. And I received them by email as supplemental information, but I don't actually feel very comfortable asking questions based on those details in this meeting because they're not on our agenda, and that would, in my view, lack transparency, in particular for the public, as well as any directors who don't have those details, because we can't look at it. I can't refer to a page in something that's before us. So I would like the committee to make, if the committee is happy with the level of detail, that's fine. I would like it to be a deliberative decision, and that's why I'm putting forward this motion and for consideration by the Assembly. So is there any other discussion on that? Director Gisborne and then Director McCormick.
Yes, I very much appreciate the more detailed level that goes into our financial plan. I found it very helpful when working with members of the public, because sometimes people have concerns and they want to say, like, how much does, here's an example, how much does the Paradise Valley Exhibition Park cost the taxpayers? And that's something that's a more detailed question that, it doesn't get necessarily get into those numbers in this type of financial plan layout, because that's fairly detailed. But in the past, it was in there, and it was really nice to then be able to hand our entire financial plan over to this member of the public that might have that question. And I think it was like $4,000 or $5,000, because Paradise Exhibition Park is, in my opinion, very cost-effective way of providing a service, whereas other regional parks can actually be very expensive. And it's not like our regional parks have the same costs per acre. They're all very different, very unique. And then having those individual breakdown really kind of helps the public understand that, they're not paying the same for each park. And then there's even more information in there. So then I think that will also help our organization reduce potential FOI requests and things like that, where folks are going, hey, I want to find out what's going on with this. And our old way of having it, yes, it's a lot more detailed than we necessarily need around this table. But I think for transparency with the public and for some of our high level decision making, but then how it rubber hits the road, I really like having that information, because just hand it to the public when they start asking tough questions, and then they go like, oh, okay, it's all here. And hopefully they don't keep asking for more and more and more, because it's like, well, if you want any more detail than what's there, you're going to have to speak to the appropriate departments. And really, they never really seem interested in going deeper than what's in those old financial plans. So I find it very helpful. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Director McCormick, and then Director Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. I also find the detailed information really helpful. And one example that I would look at, I'm looking at the detailed page that we received yesterday, and this is of Shelter Point Park, and I noticed there's $1,600 in revenue from the concession this year, but there's nothing budgeted for next year. So things like that is something that I'm likely to get asked by the public. Well, what's the plan for next year? Is there going to be a concession or not? And I wouldn't know the answer, but when I look at this, I can see there is no budget for next year, so I still don't know the answer. But this information is incredibly helpful, because we get asked these questions. You get asked these questions when you're at the grocery store, or, at the dentist, or wherever you might happen to be. So that's where it would be really hard to track our time that we spend doing this role. But again, I really find the details very helpful, and I would like to continue to receive all the information at the beginning so that we know what we're doing. And I definitely support the recommendation.
Thank you. Director Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. So I don't read all the details, because a lot of them pertain to things that are outside my bailiwick. But I really enjoy the big picture, because if I am curious, having the details to back up what I'm curious about, and I can go chase it down, is really helpful. And lots of times my schedule for trying to figure these things out is not the same as everyone else. So it helps if I don't have to go ask for information, wait for it, and then get it, because sometimes I don't have time to do that. And so then I end up with these questions in my mind and not knowing where to find the answers. And so I have to ask questions or drop it because I feel like it's my fault because I was behind the 8 ball or something. And so for me, providing the information at details helps me if I need to go reference it. It doesn't mean I'm going to read all of it, but if I need to go looking for it and it's there, that's so helpful. So yeah, I was zeroing in on a couple things. Would have been helpful if I could have went and looked stuff up so that I could understand the answers. We're getting a ton of questions around the new Resource Recovery Center. And I realize that when public's asking questions, it's best for them to ask them of staff. But it does help if I have some rudimentary understanding of what's going on and speak from my own behalf about my own understandings and point to where the real answers are at and show in reports where I received information about that and if only to feel I'm doing my due diligence and understanding what it is we're doing oversight on. And that's important to me. So, you know, I like big picture stuff and then the backup as well. Maybe an attachment or whatever.
Is there further, Director Southcott?
Thanks, Chair. So make this brief because I don't want to repeat what people have said, but I just want to emphasize that I also appreciate the really good high level view that this report presents. I really value that. It does give meaning to everything else. Occasionally, I also want to dig down into the details, but to have this view, mostly what I'm looking for is answered in this report. Sometimes it's not, and I also share Director Elliott's view that there's a limited amount of time to do research. My time budget. So thank you.
Thank you. It's a bit like a pyramid. So yeah, we want to definitely focus on the top of the pyramid, but sometimes we want to dive down to the foundation. Is there any further debate on this? Are we clear on what we're moving, on what we're voting on? Because I don't know, would you like me to read it again, or maybe corporate officer could pop it up on the screen so we can just make sure we're good with the wording. I'm good with the wording because I came up with it, but
Amend that.
so that's that the committee recommend the board request staff to include the detailed budgets and all future financial plans. And that was draft 1 is what we had last year. Okay, so thank you, corporate officer. So unless anyone has further debate on it, I will then call the question on this motion. All those in favor? Opposed, none opposed, carried. Okay, great. So now we're on to, right, so we have the third item. We're not done with this. We're not done yet. That's the financial plan. Let's not move on too quick. I was thinking of, we're moving through the agenda really quickly. So we have actually item 2 in the package, which we were told we really should consider. Would someone, which is now item 3, would someone like to put forward something to that effect? Director Elliott, is there a seconder for that? Director Brander, that's good. So discussion on this item. Director Elliott.
So originally I was thinking we should probably not do this until we had an answer from the city. But now I understand that it's kind of a placeholder and it's best that we put that placeholder there for some reporting at year end. And that we can change it later if we get a response that's negative. If we get a response that's positive, then we're completely on track. So I support the motion.
Yes, and thank you for clarifying that. Director Gisborne.
Yeah, I'm kind of torn 50% one way, 50% the other way. I recognize the need to do a budget amendment so that way, we can be compliant with all the legislative requirements. However, the motion also does, earmark community works funds from the Cadet Regional District of roughly 1.2 million. And with the other items on our finance committee that we have postponed until next year, related to the fire protection and the huge increases that our residents are facing out there, it makes it very difficult for me because I would really much rather see those community works funds earmarked towards our fire halls and our rural services, our water systems and sewer systems, and mainly the big fire apparatus. But I understand that we did pass a motion to have this offer with the city. But yeah, I'm torn one way or the other, and I guess what I would say is I really hope that the city declines our offer respectfully. I won't take that as anything negative. If anything, I would actually appreciate it, because these community works funds, they have a significant impact on our rural electoral area services. So I don't know, half a dozen of one, 6 of the other.
But either way, you will choose one. One will be 50.1%, and you can't put hands up on both parts.
We're not giving you a vote over.
We're not doing that. Okay, so is there any further discussion on this item in the agenda, which is the recommendation? Okay, I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed.
I guess I'm in favor.
I guess you're in favor. I just wanted to check to see if your hand came up there. So that passes unanimously. Are there any other motions anyone would like to make related to the budget at this time? And this is the first round. We'll see the next round in January. And Director Gisborne?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, taking a look at our financial plan, we've run into this challenge when it comes to grant and aid, and I believe a general grant and aid is one that tends to get like over gobbled up each year, and I think it's sitting at 96,000. And I'm just wondering about the appetite around the table to amend that to 110,000, which would be just a hair under 15% increase. Now, keep in mind, that doesn't mean that that money gets spent. It would still be a weighted vote amongst all the directors if it was to be allocated in the future, but that would just mean that that would be available.
Right. So are you making that as a motion?
Sure, I'll make that as a motion.
Okay, just so that's the easiest way to debate this. So the motion, corporate officer,
to amend general grant and aid 96,000 to 110,000 dollars to dollars.
is that okay, corporate officer? Do we have a wording that you can work with? So it's to amend the amount we're putting into the general grants and aid from 96,000 to 110,000. Is there a seconder for that amendment?
Seconded.
Director Lennox. Okay, discussion on this motion. It's pretty clear, but Director Gisborne?
Yeah, I'll be real quick. I think this would be like a good starter. And when we do get draft 2 with this proposed or potential change based on if this motion passes, I think that would also be a good starting point to then take a look at our electoral area grants and aid as well. And I think that should be a more wholesome and in-depth discussion at our next finance committee meeting.
Thank you. And I'll just add to that, last year with all the, we did a major overhaul of our grants and aid, but we didn't increase it. So to keep it kind of clear for us and the taxpayer, we didn't increase anything. Everything stayed the same level overall. So having, having a bit of an increase this year does make sense to me, because otherwise that would be 2 years in a row. And the organizations are facing, the inflation that everyone had to face last year. Okay, Director Lennox.
Yeah, just quickly, for the proponent, is there a reason you chose the number?
Director Gisborne?
Yes, the reason I chose that number was, as Director Fall said, it's been a couple of years. We tend to be oversubscribed, and I felt that around 14 to 15% worked out to a relatively round number, about 110,000, which I think would be not too much of a jump, but also still be able to capture some of the previous grant and aid requests that we've run into where we weren't able to allocate it.
And I'll point out that this number can be revised at any point as we go forward. So if someone has they want to put forward a different rationalization for a number change, or go back, that's okay too. So this is just to put it forward and get it in the next. If this passes, it would show up in round 2 of our budget. Okay, so is there any further discussion? Director Elliott and then Director Gisborne. Director Elliott?
So I found in the 5-year operating budget summary, the grants and aid numbers for general grants and aid to be 200 and something. Is that including annuals, or why is that? Like, I'm just asking questions about the 5-year operating grants and aid general number being at 278,098, which is different than the numbers in the motion, and maybe it's the details I'm lacking and it's somewhere else. I just didn't find it.
Ms. Green, and maybe you could clarify that for us. But I believe in the detailed budget, just before I pass it over to Ms. Green, and that's actually the total amount, including the local area ones, is the 278, whereas the general is 96. But Ms. Green, maybe hearing it from you would be better than from me.
Okay, yes, thank you. Through the chair, so I can share my screen again, and I can just that might help. So you'll see here, this is the grants and aid. So general grants and aid is 96,000. Electoral area 84,321, 20,000 from area B, 38,094 from area C, 28,456 from area D, and 11,227 from area E. So yeah, the 278 is all of the general and the EA grants and aid.
Okay, so I'm looking at a line that is general grants and aid from all of those packages. Okay,
Correct. It's the grants and aid service as opposed to the line item.
Yes.
right, it was labeled general, so that confused me. But they're general grants from the areas and general grants from the general.
Yeah, because the local grants and aid don't have their own services, so they're included in this this place here.
So
And
my
technically,
question, I
greening
have
are
a
they?
question.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah,
Then-
go ahead.
Would it not make sense to raise the overall number by a certain percentage and then distribute amongst the source areas? That way it would be an equitable increase across the board.
It could be. And what I would suggest, just because we could spend a lot of time figuring out a number, I think if we agree on some increase, then at round two, it would be really appropriate to have a bit of a deep dive on the grants and aid and come forward with changes, because we also had, questions around we ran out of money in some of the local area ones, and we had big surpluses in other ones. So there may be some other adjustments that might not be so simple as just increasing. I think looking at them as a package in the context, and if this number, if this motion passed, we can always change it too at that time and have a grant and aid discussion. So maybe the request I would have is for the committee to go forth and think about what would be an appropriate way to do that, and then we can discuss it. Does that make sense, Director Elliott?
Your audio just cut out briefly.
I was just asking if that made sense to Director Elliott, that we, or I mean, you're welcome to put forward a motion now, but it would make a lot of sense to me to have a detailed discussion next round on grants and aid levels.
Yeah, so there is a motion on the floor. I'm just a little uncomfortable. I wanted to be able to digest things before making decisions about that kind of stuff. And so for me, passing this motion and then having a discussion later and changing it doesn't make a ton of procedural sense. So I'm just curious why we're not, maybe, I guess maybe I'd like to postpone the motion to our next round.
Okay, is that a motion to postpone? Is there?
Yeah, motion to postpone.
Okay, seconder Director McCormick. So, okay, discussion on the motion to postpone, and then this motion would come up. Director Southcott.
Chair, I support the motion to postpone. I also, getting back to what I was going to say to the motion, I have reservations because the city is trying to figure out how to put the brakes on the amount of taxpayer money that's going into supporting essentially social benefits through city funding, both in, across the board. We all know what that constitutes, grants as well as permissive tax exemptions, etc. So my thinking will definitely loop that into this discussion, and I need to be, it gives me real reluctance to arbitrarily change bigger general grants and aid before having a chance to really put more people into this.
Yeah, Director Gisborne.
Yeah, I support the motion to postpone, even though the original motion was one that I put forward. Sorry. One of the things that does concern me, of course, is the climbing up of the grant and aid amounts, both general and electoral. And as was pointed out, the proposed electoral area B grant and aid going from 15,000 to 20,000 is roughly a 30% increase. So that's kind of partially where my proposal was for general grant and aid to go up by 15%. And then at a later date, I was going to then put forward that the electoral area grant, at least from area B, would only go up 15%, which to me is very high. But 30% is even higher. So I'm very happy to postpone this, and I'm glad that the directors have now got some ideas going around in their head, and I look forward to a much more wholesome and in-depth discussion at our next Finance Committee meeting, and thank you very much.
Director McCormick.
Thank you. I also support the motion to postpone, but I do hope that when the agenda is being worked out for the January Finance Committee, that we can allow enough time to have that fulsome discussion that I hear around the table that everybody wants to have regarding the grants. So that would just be my comment, that we be enabled to have that discussion in January.
Yeah, it'll come up It's on our radar now, and I think we have time. We're early in the budget season, and I think this is entirely a political decision. The amount is whatever we want to set it at. So I think we need to come to an agreement that hopefully we can agree on. And okay, so any further discussion on the motion to postpone? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed? We postponed that motion. Okay, so we're on to the next item, which is 8.6, the fire services review costs and other implications. And there's first I'll start with any questions around the table, and I know Mr. Toms is on the screen here. So if is there anyone who has questions for Mr. Toms about these? Director Gisborne? Director Gisborne?
Okay, sorry, your sound cut out.
Oh,
I guess.
Speak louder.
Okay, thank you. I guess my question is, since I've submitted the statutory service review, could these costs related to the Malaspina Volunteer Fire Department service also be encompassed with that formal service review process?
Mr. Tom, so how does this relate to the costs and the process to the formal service review that's been submitted?
Through the chair, I can speak to what's in my report. The request to the minister for a formal review, I don't have any experience or any specific info, and I might defer to the CAO, but I don't know if we've received anything back on that yet either.
Further, Director Gisborne?
Oh, no, that's okay. I just want to say that I'm very thankful for the staff report, a lot of really good information in here. I do believe, all four of our fire departments, MVFD, NVFD, SIVFD, and LIVFD, go towards this climate audit workplace assessment, total of $87,000. And then the other fire services review anticipated in the cost of $50,000 to $70,000. I know those are, jumps in taxation. That's where it comes from. But as we've been seeing with our volunteer fire department budgets, there have been significant increases over the last 10 years for a plethora of reasons. And I look at this as, it's going to be a benefit to the service. It's going to be a benefit to the folks that are operating the service. And I think in the long run, it can actually save us money by potentially avoiding some of the headaches. And I'm actually in support of this. And thank you very much to our staff for putting the document before us.
Thank you. Any further discussion on this? So would someone like to put forward, there's no and between them, so we'll do them one at a time. Director Gisborne?
I'll move number one.
Okay, is there a second? Director Lennox, is there discussion on this one? I have one. So I have one comment, which is maybe a question for Mr. Thompson. If I understand the report, these items come about because the board, Director Gisborne put forward a motion for a service review, and then the board instead adopted a motion to ask for a report on staff on service review costs. And this report then said, well, some of the concerns aren't really service review concerns, they're workplace review concerns. Is that a correct understanding of how this evolved and got before us here?
Yeah, Chair, you are correct.
Okay, thank you. And I guess I'm just going to speak from LIVFD's point of view, and I know the motion's MVFD, but we're in general on these, and there is a synergy because they could share. I am not convinced that doing this for LIVFD is so useful, and I'll ask Mr. Toms for clarification on that. And the reason I say that is because we already have a wish list beyond what is feasible for the taxpayer, and we know that the main issue for LIVFD, the number one overriding issue, is a shortage of money. I mean, we have all these things we wish to do, we just don't have money to do them. And so I don't really see the value in spending $20,000 on adding more to a list of things that we can't afford to do. And I guess I'll note also as an aside, maybe before I hand it to Mr. Toms to clarify a bit, a year ago, we received a report on a wellness survey of fire department members. And so there has been some information on, it's not exactly the same as this workplace assessment. And so, I do see that, there could be some value in this. I definitely think there could be value. I just don't see if is that the burning issue for $20,000, or would we be better, are we not better putting that money towards reserves? Because that'll just make our financial issues even more difficult, and we won't, and if the review comes up with a bunch of things we wish to do, well, that'll just stop us from doing the things we already know we need to do. So Mr. Toms, is there, I'm just wondering on that, because I think there's really a crunch coming with LIVFD, and I don't know whether this is actually going to help LIVFD that much. Could I ask clarification on that?
Yeah, I appreciate your question, Chair. As said in the report, there is value to these, but I like that you're picking on some of the other ongoing, a lot of investment into understanding mental health implications and other health and safety. There's a lot of good going on in the LIVFD, as there are in all our fire services. But just I won't contradict what you said, that perhaps the number one issue, certainly in the LIVFD, and to some degree, though not to the same extreme, in all our fire services, is financial. And we certainly, in that report that came earlier today, is intended to put that on the table for the board to think about. So I won't contradict what you're saying, because I think there's value in assessing always and hearing from membership, but I appreciate the board's needing to make a decision on where it puts its money.
Okay, thank you. And so I guess I'll just, so the board knows, I won't be making that fourth motion, but we're on motion one, so I will speak to the motion on the table, which is the Malaspina one. Any other discussion on doing a workplace assessment for Malaspina? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. That one carries. So item 2, would someone be interested in making that motion?
Sorry.
This is for Northside. I see no hands up. Okay, so how about any other motion? So there's a Savory Island, that's item 3. Is there a desire to do that? I see a shaking of a head, so I will. Savory's also facing obviously some limitation issues, so I don't see any appetite here. So, I mean, presumably we can revisit this option later, and maybe these departments will do it at another time. So is there any other items the board or the committee would like to do on this before we move on? Okay, that's it. Okay, so thank you. We're on to, we're on to new business. So that's 2:09. We got hopefully enough time before the board meeting to deal with this. So our new business is the Community Works Fund policy. And what I thought of doing, just because this, we want to be efficient here and try to make any policy changes and deliberate on the changes in a way that we can get some progress. So what I would like to do is allow one round of comments by the table of what generally you would like to see. So speak if you wish, but don't make any motions. And then I'll ask and allow people to put motions. And I know at least 2 directors have motions that they'd like to do. And there's probably likely others. So first, round of comments and questions for staff. Director McCormick.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I keep bringing this up because we've had for the last 10 years a situation where electoral areas have been chronically shortchanged for funds. We have not earmarked any of our community works funds specifically for electoral areas, which from the research, most other regional districts do. So I'm very concerned about the upcoming expenses that we have. On Texada, we've got our community hall. In Lund, you've got your water system. In south of town, you've got fire trucks. We've got a long list of things of electoral area needs. And the people who reside in these electoral areas are the ones who are least able to afford a high borrowing cost. We're talking about seniors on pensions who can't afford to spend money on just bank charges, interest. So we need to invest that community works funding directly into our electoral areas. There's many different ways to do it. And I believe that a lot of that information is already contained in the reports that we have before us. So specifically, what would we like to do? I would like to change our Community Works Fund allocation policy under policy guidelines, and this is on, I forget which page it's on, but it's in our report. And so I would like to say that instead of the wording now, oh, and that is on page, hang on. Perhaps, I'm sorry, I don't know, but it's under that.
Page 172 of the PDF, I believe.
Okay, thank you. And what I'm looking at under allocation policy guideline number 4, it reads, allocation of community works fund will be considered first and foremost for Catholic Regional District own corporate financial challenges. I would like to see the words own corporate financial challenges changed to read first and foremost for electoral area needs. So those are the words that I would like to see in there. And I would like to see that approved, perhaps today, so that we can go on and have a secondary discussion regarding how that money is divvied up among electoral areas. And there's many different ways to do it. So your question was, what do we want to see happen today? That's where I'm going. And that's what I would like to see happen. We can't continue to shortchange our electoral areas from funding that they are intended to receive based on the agreements with the senior government. So that's where I'm going, and I'm happy with any route that will get us there.
Okay, thank you. And the policy shows up a couple places in our package, so it's actually right on the second page of the item, which is on page 136 of our PDF is the number 4. Okay, Director Gisborne.
Thank you, Chair. I've done a couple of things on this policy. So there was 2 additional items that were included on our agenda today that I had included previously. One is the old 2013 policy, which was the original policy, and then there was also a proposed draft policy. I'm not moving the draft policy, don't worry. But to explain some of the language in that draft policy, what I essentially did was took the old 2013 policy and took the new policy that we currently have from 2020 and kind of just married them together. Like I Frankensteined them with Photoshop. Like I didn't go and rewrite a bunch of things. It was just those 2 policies put together. I completely agree with the intent that Director McCormick is putting forward. And I think the first step when addressing these policies is purpose and scope. So the current policy reads under purpose. Community Works Fund's allocation policy provides direction on allocating Community Works Fund's funding, as well as considering grant applications for Community Works Fund's funding from outside agencies. And the scope is that the board will be designated to review and evaluate all proposed projects and initiatives that meet eligible criteria and guidelines of Community Works Funds. To compare that with the original policy, quite often a policy is created because an issue shows up. Now, I wasn't here in 2013, but when I read the 2013 policy, it says purpose. Community Works Funds allocation policy provides direction on who will be entrusted with allocating the Community Works Funds funding. And the scope reads, the electoral area directors will be designated to review and evaluate all proposed projects and initiatives that meet the eligible criteria and guidelines of Community Works funding. Now, I want to give a big thanks to Linda Greenan for the report, the 114 pages. That couldn't have been easy to get all that information from other regional districts. And what I picked up was that there's a fairly consistent theme across the other regional districts, that the Community Works Funds are decided by the electoral area directors. Sometimes it's even one electoral area having their own little meeting and then they have their own allocation and it's just for them. I don't think we need to get that detailed. But I do believe that the community works funds, which are allocated to the regional district for the electoral area population, should really be up to the electoral area directors. Because what we ran into recently was a situation where non-electoral area director was putting forward motions to have it going towards shared projects. And that motion is not out of order with our current policy, because our current policy, it even says 5D, projects with a regional focus or benefiting a larger portion of the population are the projects that will be given priority. Well, the majority of the regional district's population lives in the municipality. And that's not, picking on anyone. That's just reality of the situation we find ourselves in. And I don't think that our current policy reflects the intention of why community works funds exists. So I think, I would be very happy to change the purpose and the scope of the community works funds policy to be more in alignment with the original purpose and scope and the intention of the policy when it was created in 2013, to clarify that this really should be up to the electoral area directors. And then, of course, that 2013 policy, policy number 4 reads, in keeping with the spirit and intent of distinct and separate funding streams and through courtesy and respect, the board will ratify projects and initiatives authorized by the electoral area directors. Because when we do go to vote on something that, say, has to do with Northside Fire Department, that's as I understand, an unweighted vote amongst the whole board because it's allocation of funding. So municipal directors will be voting almost all the time on community works funds allocation, but the policy, the old one, would say, hey, we'll ratify what the electoral area directors have approved. And that was a way of making sure that we all understand each other, we understand the issue that we're dealing with, and that way the electoral areas feel comfortable with addressing how this grant funding is going. And I know I'm talking even more, but when I also did that kind of draft document, there was one change that I actually left out, which was saying that the municipality is not an outside agency. And I just kind of took that one off to kind of go, hey, if the municipality does want to partner with the electoral area directors, I'd be happy to have an avenue where they can ask us. But it still, I think, should be up to the electoral area directors. And then if we run into those situations, we can have a collaborative discussion with each other. So my thoughts, my stance are we should change the purpose and the scope to be more in alignment with the original policy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Continuing our one round, we'll do. So Director Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm just kind of, there are things that get voted on even at the board level only by the areas. And is there a way to have a service that is for community works funds that is only for the areas, make it so that the vote at the board level matches what you're trying to accomplish? And that's my question. And then a second question, would it make sense to have a standing committee that is for the community works fund? And if there was a standing committee, it would include the area directors, so decisions about the community works funds could be hashed out annually at that standing committee, and perhaps they don't need to have as many meetings as many of the other standing committees, but it wouldn't need to necessarily include the city directors, because if a person was, if the area directors are wanting to partner their dollars with the city, they can ask them separately. So those are my questions.
Okay, thank you, Director Elliott. And they're questions I had too. So I think, because they're a bit outside the policy, and I think that's where we're maybe going. So I'll try to rephrase them, and maybe our corporate officer can add some light on this. So one is, do we need, what would a service do for us in terms of voting? Do we need one, or would it help us or hinder us? And would it be required to get certain voting structures, unweighted votes, or, just the electoral area directors? And would a committee be needed to facilitate that governance decision-making process? Corporate officer?
Thank you, through the chair. I think we would have to explore that, like establishing a service. When you establish a service, you can establish the participants and the voting structure. Or we would have to look at it would be, if that is something that this committee would like to explore, I would recommend referring it to staff to explore service establishment and funding mechanism.
Thank you, Corporate Officer. And just for Director Elliott, I'll hand it back to you. But I have a motion to that effect in some ways, like this beyond the policy. So if we continue the rounds on the policy discussion, but I have something I'd like to put forward afterwards to look at other pieces than just policy along that line. But Director Elliott, did you have further questions before I jump over to Director Lennox?
Well, I just think, I think the voting structure needs to reflect what it is we're trying to accomplish. Because when we go with a weighted vote for everybody, we are all trying to vote in the best interests of our electorate. And that makes it really hard for city directors. Because for me to vote for or against something that's not in the best interests of my electorate when I have that vote before me is problematic. And so the votes and the weighting of them really should reflect the true intention of the funding and not be expecting directors to just treat it differently. So my goal would be that the policy, the voting structure, the decision-making structure reflects the true desire of the fund itself and not be expecting individual directors to vote contrary to what's best for the electorate just so that we can implement the spirit of the plan. So anyway, that's my perspective on where we should be trying to go with this policy or whatever it is we set up, that we leave so that the voting weights and decision-making mechanism matches what it is we're trying to do. And I don't know how we get there, but that's what I'd like it to reflect.
Thank you. Nicely articulated. I'll hand it over to Director Lennox next.
Thanks, Chair. And along the lines, Director Elliott was, point 4 there is really what we're talking about with spirit and intent. I think the idea is to move beyond courtesy and respect and actually define it and make it easy for us and future directors to get this right. I do want to say that I appreciate the staff report and all the reports we've got on this. I do echo the same sentiments as the other directors about intent is for the electoral areas. It's simple. And you can see the evidence from many other regional districts approach it just the same. And the folks that I've talked to, they're a little bit surprised that we moved away. That was then and this is now. But I think you can understand where we're coming from. I would say there's good evidence to, I've never made any of these major decisions on community works funds, but you can see from the past that Area A has benefited, but also we share that fund when it's appropriate. So I think we all have the same intent of using it for the right projects at the right time, but the intent is what we're getting at. The 2013 policy seems quite appropriate to me in most cases, except we need to flush out point 4 as Director Elliott said.
Anyone else who hasn't spoken yet? Director Brander.
Chair, I've liked what a lot of people have said around the table so far. And my comments are just that based on the way that the community works funds is allocated to us, that it is the population of the electoral areas that it is based on, then I think it makes most sense for those directors in the electoral areas to be deciding on how it is dispersed. That's it.
Thank you. Anyone, Director Southcott, do you have anything to say before I speak?
No, thanks.
You're the only one who hasn't spoken yet. Okay. I'll give my comments on this and then we can decide or try to figure out a way to proceed. In my view, the concerns raised regarding the allocation of Community Works Fund seem to go a little bit beyond just policy changes. So I think changing the policy is, of course, very important, in particular regarding prioritization and distribution of funds. That's what the policy can provide. However, underlying some of those proposed changes that have been put forward are implied changes to the decision process by which Community Works Fund are allocated and voted on. The survey that we had from May the 3rd, a lot of work, and I'm very thankful. I think we're all very thankful for it, included a number of questions on that prioritization, but it included one question on voting structures, on the actual governance issues. And that question was, does the full board or the EA directors decide on the use of the funds? There were at least 3 or 4 different allocation and decision-making and voting structures used by the different regional districts, including our current process, which was more on one end, and there were other elements of other options, all just the EA directors or unweighted votes, and there are different processes. And we're not quite ready to decide. I'm not quite ready to decide which alternative is best, but we have heard concerns about the weighted voting, and we've desires for the EA directors to decide. But the question I have is that seems to go beyond just policy changes. Just putting in the policy saying the EA directors vote doesn't get us away from the Local Government Act. If those other regional districts are following the Local Government Act and it's only the EA directors or it's an unweighted vote, how does that happen and comply with the Local Government Act? What else are they doing and what don't we understand? So, so do they create a new service? Did they change their procedure bylaw? Do they have a committee? So these are other tools that might be put forward to us. And so we asked in the past for staff to do the survey, which was great. I would like to go a bit beyond that. I think, and we can do the policy changes now. I'm not averse to that, but I think I would also like to consider asking staff along the lines of what our corporate officer suggested to look at those governance tools, because maybe we're missing something, and she would be in a very good position to bring forward and say, what are the governance tools that we have that would enable those alternatives? What would allow EA directors? Is it a committee plus a service? Is it just the committee, or is it what is it? And then I think we could actually look at the possibilities and then really refine the policy, because if I'm not mistaken, and I'll bring it back to a question for a corporate officer, but I think some of the changes to the prior Community Works Fund policy were because of a inconsistency with the Local Government Act of what we actually have to do given the voting structure that we have to do given our structure. So I would actually like, at a certain point today, I'll be wanting to put forward a motion to ask staff to do that, to come back with a report on options on the allocation and decisioning and voting alternatives, the ones we saw in the report. So we have the report, we see the options. What we don't know is how did they do it? What did they do, the other regional districts? What did they do to allow that? Is there something beyond just changing the policy? And then if we know that, then we'd be in a much better position to say it's the policy. The policy reflects our structure, and maybe we need a new service. Maybe we need we've heard in the past, Director Gisborne has talked about Rural Services Committee. Director Elliott talked about a Community Works Fund Standing Committee. Maybe others have talked about Rural Services Committee, although it's mostly Director Gisborne. But but we've had other discussions about committees, and we had, weighted votes versus unweighted votes. We have information on how we have to vote. So really, that's what I would like. I'm not going to put anything forward yet because I did say round of discussion, but that's what I'd like. I'd like a comprehensive information so we can not just change the policy, but get our voting in place that is in line with what we're trying to do with the policy. So with that, so that's one round of questions, of comments. So I'd like then now to open up for motions if we so desire. So Director McCormick.
Thank you. Okay, I would like to move that the Community Works Fund allocation policy guideline number 4 be amended to delete the words own corporate financial challenges and replace them with the words electoral area needs.
Is there a seconder for that? I can't see. So is that Director Gisborne? Yeah, I believe. Yep. Yeah.
Who else?
Who else? I see a couple of hands there. So, right. So it's just changing those words, striking out our own corporate financial challenges, and then replacing that with electoral area needs. So is there discussion on that? I can't see the board, so speak up if you want to speak. Director Gisborne.
Yeah, I support the motion. I do support the intent behind the policy. The one thing that I might be a little concerned about, wearing my very high level hat, would be the purpose and the scope of the policy. and a few other of the policy lines where, it talks about what benefits the greater region. So I completely support this intent to say, look, it's the needs of the electoral areas. But I hope it doesn't stop there, is I guess what I'm trying to say.
Is there further, Director McCormick, and then Director Brander, and then Director Elliott? Okay,
Well,
Director McCormick.
If this motion passes, I have another recommendation to come for policy guideline number 5, because I think changing number 4 would put number 5 in a contradictory position. So, but focusing on the change for number 4, I think I've said it. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Brander?
Thanks, Chair. I guess it's kind of a question to the mover. Is it your intention that these changes preclude us from supporting regional services? And the reason I ask this is that I'll say Area C in particular. Area C has not had any appropriate projects to be used for community works funding to this point. So sometimes the only way that the residents of Area C get to see a benefit from community works funds is when they're spent on a regional level. So is it intent that stop us from doing that, or it's just that electoral area needs are viewed prior to, say, regional needs?
Director McCormick, yeah, would you like
Thank
to
you.
clarify?
I think anything can be allowed. I don't think it would preclude that from happening, but it would mean that instead of considering first and foremost corporate financial challenges, we would consider first and foremost electoral area needs. That doesn't mean that we can't pool the funds and say if Area C doesn't need it, give more to Lund for their water system or whatever. I mean, I think that's a possibility. But it's really just to change what is considered first and foremost. It doesn't mean exclusive.
Sure.
Okay, does that answer your question, Director Brander?
Yes, I think it does.
Okay, Director Elliott, I believe you were next.
I just wanted to caution in a policy trying to judge what might be the priority of the future. And so I think what you really want to focus on is the decision making and who holds it. And that's where we're struggling right now. So I don't think you need to add a lot of restrictive language to what you may or may not consider priorities of the future, because flexibility is how we work together and you don't want to restrict that. So deciding today what first and foremost should be considered is a kind of a statutory way of making a decision. You have to show that you've done that before you can even consider this. So it may not be the wisest language to use. And what you really want to pay attention to is at the end result, you want all the directors that are invested in the Community Works Fund to have the amount of decision capacity and weight in the decisions that is appropriate for whatever is going on. And so if those folks really do see the benefit of a regional project that's going to help their folks, and they would prefer to consider that first, it should be allowed to do that. And the discretion should be with the elected official of the day. Because as priorities change and as what you might be considering changes, so should the ability to change that. So I'm a big proponent of non-restrictive language and just zeroing in on what it is you're trying to accomplish.
Thank you. Now, before I see Director Brander, but I'll speak since I haven't yet. I'm not averse to this change, but I think once we get more changes on the table that we can agree to, maybe when this goes forward, we might consider merging items 4 and 5. I think per Director Elliott's comments, because I agree that having too many restrictions might be not really what we're trying to do. We're trying to, it's really, if it's about voting structure, we need to address that. But I think if we want to have prioritization, we want the policy to be clear on what the priorities are. I think including rural electoral area projects is certainly important. But we maybe want to be not closing the door. It's not entirely closed, but we want to kind of make sure it's clear that we can allocate funds where appropriate. Director Brander?
Thanks, Chair. Director Elliott for some of her comments. It made me think about this item number 4 again. I'm actually kind of pleased with just how it is right now, because the way I read this, it's about considering the corporate financial challenges of the QRD, meaning our issues versus spending the money on outside agencies that may come for funding. So I'm quite happy to leave it as it is, with the QRD's corporate financial challenges, first and foremost. And then I would suggest figuring out a way to work the electoral areas as a priority in item number 5 instead. So we're still establishing it as a priority, but we're leaving number 4 alone because we're saying we're going to deal with the QRD business before we consider what's from outside of the building.
Thanks, Director McCormick.
Thank you. See, I don't read number 4 quite that way, Director Brander. I read it as what it says is first and foremost for the corporate financial challenges, the regional based, the big picture, things that affect the most people. That's the way I read it. And that's why I think it should be changed to electoral area needs. That does not mean that we won't spend money on corporate issues. We certainly can do whatever it is that we wish to do. But I think it sets it out in the policy that we support electoral area needs and that this is a priority. And so I support making this change, and I hope other directors will see the logic in doing so.
Thank you, Director Gisborne.
I guess it's a question for our staff, because whatever policy we have, the staff will interpret it when they bring forward a request or an option or an allocation of community works funds. So in relation to number 4, the current policy says allocation of community works funds will be considered first and foremost for Cathett Regional District's own corporate financial challenges. We've heard a couple of different interpretations of how that's written. And I guess it's a question for our CIO. Does that favor regional corporate services like solid waste management, or is it just regional district services in general, which could be a fire department, could be a water system? And I'm just kind of wondering, how is it currently being interpreted?
CIO?
Through the chair, I would or with your latter.
Okay, it's regional district services, whether it's electoral area or regional in nature. Okay.
Okay, so corporate financial challenges means anything within the QRD, not necessarily region. The more regional services versus more local don't. That's no difference in that language.
So
go ahead.
Just a quick follow-up. So number 4 currently is about prioritizing regional district assets versus things like improvement districts or other water systems and outside agencies. Okay. No, I'm torn.
Now, I expect this might take a while to, for us to finalize on a policy. We're not going to, we'll get as many changes as we can today, but when the dust settles, we'll probably go at it again, I would imagine. So on this motion, which is to change that item 4, is there further discussion? Director Gisborne?
Yeah, since we've kind of maybe gone half and half, I wonder if maybe we should postpone this or table this until we start getting some of these other proposed changes and then bring it back. Because I completely agree with Director McCormick's intent, but I'm wondering, what I'm hearing is we might not get there from here, if that makes sense. And I want to make sure we get there.
Yeah, and if we run out of time this meeting, because we got 50 more minutes, then we'll be postponing them ideally till the next finance committee meeting in January anyway. So we could table them. I don't know if that's a motion you're making or if I
could table it.
Okay, is there a seconder to table this until after? So table it till later today, Director Elliott.
Comes back in the same meeting.
Same meeting. So after we do further motions. Okay, is there Director Elliott on tabling? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll second, and then I'll just speak on it. I think if we come back with if we get the report around the governance tools, it might get us there, and that provides a better solution to us. You might come up with less wording as far as prioritizing, because you can leave the prioritizing annually to the decision makers of the day, and that might be a better solution. And so those governance tools, I think, are important to moving forward with some of the language. So I would be in favor of trying to make as little changes as possible until we have the bigger picture stuff looked at.
Thank you. And I know Director Gisborne has other motions, but I maybe the committee may wish to consider the motion that I have prepared on that, either after or before. But I'll allow Director Gisborne to make his motions when it comes up. So Director McCormick.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with what Director Elliott has just said. But to me, the important thing is to get our policy wording correct, and we can work out the details subsequently. Whether it's through a staff report, whether it's through a report on electoral area voting at the board, or how that's going to work. We can make those decisions when we get that information, but it's rather the overarching big picture intent that I think this motion addresses. And I don't see a need to table it to later in today's meeting, because this is the last item of business on our agenda. So I'm not sure what we would be tabling it to. In January, I believe that we're going to have a fairly full agenda anyway. And by changing the policy today, that would it would give direction to staff to work on a report, because I'm sure there will be a subsequent motion to ask for that. Understanding what our big picture thinking is. And that's why I think it's important to get the big picture thing right, and then work out the details after that. So
the motion is to table it, and it would be to the, after any subsequent motions on this item, and it would come back. So is there any further discussion on the motion to table this item? Seeing none, I will then call the question on tabling. All those in favor of tabling? All those opposed to tabling? Two opposed. It carries. It's tabled. Okay, so what's the wish of the committee, Director Gisborne?
Yes, hearing big picture, high level, and I'm thinking that maybe our first step would be changing the purpose and the scope of the policy. And therefore, the other changes that we make to individual policy lines would then match the purpose and the scope of the policy change, if that makes sense. So if it's okay, I would move that the committee recommend the board draft changes to the purpose and scope of policy 3.12 to match what was submitted by Director Gisborne. Community Works Funds Allocation Draft Policy. It says October 2nd, but I think that's right. That's just the name of the file.
So Director Gisborne, just before it gets seconded, would it not be more clear to just be specific with the wording? If I understand, and the changes you proposed, it's to add who will be entrusted with to the purpose. That's the only difference. And in the scope, it would be to change boards to EA electoral area directors. Those are the two changes, and that would make it clear in the minutes what we're actually doing.
Okay, I can read out. Move that the purpose read, quote, the Community Works Funds Allocation Policy provides direction on who will be entrusted with allocating the Community Works Funds funding, as well as considering grant applications for Community Works Funds funding from outside agencies. And scope we change to the electoral area directors will be designated to review and evaluate all proposed projects and initiatives that meet the eligible criteria and guidelines of Community Works Funds.
Thank you. So a seconder for those, Director Lennox. Okay, discussion on those two proposed changes to the purpose and the policy. Director Gisborne.
Thank you. I'm just putting these forward. They're essentially a merging of our 2013 policy and the 2020 policy. Purpose and scope, my apologies. There's a lot of details within the policy guidelines themselves, which was the item that we just tabled. But by getting, I think, the purpose and the scope clarified, then the other policies that we then start to look at changing, for example, the one about that we will look at things that are regional in nature. If our purpose and scope says, hey, this is about electoral areas, then it's a lot easier to then change those individual policy lines if we have, established a big picture scope and purpose.
Thank you. I have a question for our corporate officer, and it's related to my prior comments about, what you can do in a policy versus what we can, what we need to do elsewhere. So if we were to change the scope, now that's just in the scope part, but when we say, if the scope did say the electoral area directors will be designated to review and evaluate, what does that cause to happen? Can the policy cause that to happen, or would that actually only be possible if we also made other changes, like having a service or a committee or something else that we don't yet know what the options are until we have a report? Corporate officer?
I think that would need to be explored to find out what the mechanics of that would look like. I think I understand the intention. But yeah, so mechanics may look like establishing a service that provides that authority. At the board level, you have 7 members and you can't force other members to not participate. Committee level and at finance level, you have 7 members. You can't exclude others from participating. And when that is elevated to board level, you cannot exclude or fetter how somebody will. So really understanding the mechanics of how you want to handle the CWF funds and how probably needs to be and methods. You guys should be providing methods on how to actually achieve that. It might not be through policy language.
Thank you. Director Gisborne?
Yes, completely agree with the comments of the corporate officer. When I took a look into the history of this, our old policy from 2013, which said the electoral area directors will be designated to review and evaluate all projects, that mechanism for implementation was done through the Rural Services Committee, as other regional districts call Electoral Area Services Committee. That committee, as I understand, was dissolved by the chair in, I think, 2016 on that one. But we could, I believe, achieve that scope if the electoral area services or rural services was revived, even if it only met once a year. And the only thing they did was look over the community works funds and then forwarded those recommendations onto the board. And then the professor is absolutely correct. If we say, oh, we're going to give a bunch of money to one water system, that's not voted on by just Director Lennox. That becomes, as I understand, an unweighted vote amongst the whole board. But if our policy is saying like, hey, this goes before the electoral area directors and they have some kind of committee, that would be one way of achieving that scope and that purpose. And the reason why I'm now putting these purpose and scope before us is, if we adopt these, then that means that our board has to do some next steps to go like, okay, how do we now implement that scope? And if there's folks around the table that have apprehension, if there's a motion to say refer these things to staff, I would be okay with that too. It's, how do we get there? And I would like us to get there. I don't want to have to, have more staff reports 6 months from now or a year from now. And I think we're all moving in the right direction. It's just, how do we get there?
Exactly. Director Elliott?
So as I understand authority and voting and so forth at the regional district, a service is the only way to define who gets to vote and at what weight, depending on who's in the service. And having things go to a committee of electoral area services when it's not actually a service, right? So you would have to have a service in order for it to be designated an electoral area service. Maybe, maybe not. It's still just recommendations coming back to the board, voting at the same weighted thing, which can't be fettered. And so if you're trying to create a policy that dictates how people should vote, it's not going to work. So we really need that report around how do we, what tools do we have to change how the vote works? Is it something that can be accomplished? I mean, you can definitely have review and recommendations at the committee level that are coming from the electoral areas. But if it comes back to the board and the vote hasn't changed, then the recommendations don't have to impact the votes. And it's back to electoral or, individual directors being required to respect something that may not be in the best interests of their own electorate. And so I still think we're coming at it backwards. I don't think changing the language of the policy makes any sense if you haven't addressed how the voting's going to happen at the end. So to me, this exercise in language adoption in the policy is secondary to figuring out this whole voting problem. And how do we get the votes to reflect what we want and still be in compliance with the Local Government Act and so forth. And so I would prefer to just have everybody agree that we're trying to get the voting at the end to be different, and we need to know that in order to do any of this other stuff. And so I think the policy should definitely reflect your priorities and whatnot, but I don't think there's any point in trying to figure that out if all the voting at the end is going to be the same anyway.
Thank you. I think it should be. Yeah, I see the corporate. Oh, okay. Okay. So we'll take a 2-minute break with.
Two-minute break, Chair?
Yes, I guess we'll pause for 2 minutes since Director Gisborne just.
We'll just leave the meeting. We'll mute and leave.
Okay.
Feel bad excluding him from recess.
A little bit of time to think.
Hi. We're back in session, Chair.
Okay. Thank you. And I saw the corporate officer's hand up, but I just would like to say, I think this should be referred to staff, because then we can hear what the implications are of doing it. If just, if we just change policy, then if it's implying something else, maybe we need to package it up with others. So corporate officer, I saw you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. After hearing your guys' discussion today, it really sounds like it might be best to refer the motions that have been tabled and that are on the table to staff and direct us to research establishing a service for the CWF funds and bring forward a report. Committee.
Yes. So someone like to make, okay, move to refer this motion. Seconded by, Director Brander. Is there any discussion on the referral? Seeing none. Oh, Director McCormick.
Yeah, I support the referral. I support getting more information. But when I read the document, the survey that staff did a year or two ago, it was obvious that a number of other regional districts have a voting structure whereby the electoral areas directors are the only ones to vote at the board, much the same way as we do our planning committee. Only the planning committee members. All members attend and discuss, but it's only the planning committee that makes those decisions. And I would like to see a community works committee, call it electoral services, call it rural services, whatever you want to call it, making that decision with those directors being the ones who vote at the board the way we do it. So if we're going to refer this to staff, I just throw that into the mix of thinking so that it's understood that we know that it's possible to do under current legislation because other regional districts do it. That's it.
Thank you. And that's what a service would do. So if you just had like the old Rural Services Committee, there was no rural service. There was just a committee talking about the services that are rural in nature and funded by rural taxpayers, but they made recommendations, and the board level, the participants in the service would apply. So you could have a committee that talks about Community Works Fund, and we could have a change in policy, but at the board level, that's the process we have. The only way would be, the planning committee votes at the board because there's a planning services committee, but it's actually because there's a planning service, and those participants vote at the board. And because there's more than one of them, they get to vote. So that's why a service is there. So actually, I would like to put my motion forward. I see Director Gisborne, but I think we're going around on these things, and then we'll see the other ones, the more detailed one that Director Gisborne has, and maybe we adjust this. But I've put forward some words that's a little bit more general than what we just talked about, but it's that the committee recommend the board request a staff for a report on options to implement the CWF allocation to corporate officer.
Thank you, Chair. I understand that we have a motion on the table.
Right. Oh, right. I never called the vote. Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry.
Getting ahead of myself. We have a motion to refer this to staff, the one on the table. Director Gisborne.
Sorry, can I get clarity? I thought that the motion was to refer the motion that's on the table and the tabled motions to staff and direct staff to research establishing a service for CWF funds and bring forward a report to a future finance committee. But if that's not the motion, I just want to make sure.
Is that the motion?
Okay.
That sounds like that sounds, if we're all in concurrence that's the motion, then we're good. Director Gisborne.
Yes, I'm all in support of that motion. I'm just wondering if, do we want to have an amendment to include Director Fall's motion, which is in his back pocket, and taking a look at the staff report on page 109 of 114. I know it's quite in depth. There's actually an example from Strathcona Regional District, bylaw number 240. And they actually have within that bylaw, which establishes a reserve for community works funds, they have item number 3, which is restriction on use of funds, and then number 4, approval process for funds. And in that bylaw, it actually has, subject to the provisions of 3, approval for the use of the funds shall be decided by resolution of the electoral area directors at the regional board, which makes me go, how do they do that? So if it requires a new service, then that's the way we go. But if it just requires, say, like a bylaw, and that might be easier and, you know, a lot less paperwork, then I hope our staff will also take that into consideration. Would that require an amendment to the motion to also consider bylaw changes or implementation? Or is it just establishing a new service?
Well, I think that
Corporate officer?
like staff would explore this to achieve that we can.
But I'm happy.
So yeah, so I guess that'd be my question. So I'm happy to move an amendment to add or other options, but if staff would explore bylaws or any other options that might be available, I'm fine. There's been a lot of discussion, so I think and I think I seem to get the sense there's a general agreement on where we want to head. We just are a bit messy in how we're getting there.
I suggest we just put the motion up on the board so we can
Yeah,
have a
maybe we can
look,
see it.
confirm that that's what's on the floor, because it's been a bit of an awkward process,
Has
and
been.
then move forward.
So let's see the motion on the and maybe I'll make that amendment if we're going to look at it in detail. I think we're getting there.
Sorry, I'm just adding some. I had terrible spelling errors.
Show that on the screen.
Goodness,
Very good at typing on the fly in public.
Yeah,
Thank God for spell check.
yeah. Did it.
Nice.
I have a spelling dictionary. That's all it's worth. I still got it.
It's fun to do that.
Okay.
Think I didn't have.
Should have done this while you guys were.
Certainly not a weighted.
Well, it's of course the positions can change.
It starts with a P.
Next year might
Can you see anything?
Not yet. Oh, it's coming up. Okay, that the committee refer the motion on the table and the tabled motion to staff and request staff research voting structure and or establishing a new service for CWF and bring forward a report to a future finance committee. So actually, and I think my motion that I had in mind is covered by this. The wording's different, of course, but it gets at the essence. I think staff have heard this. It's about allocation, decision, and voting alternatives. And, you know, and a service is one option, but I think we've heard other alternatives and we don't know everything that may entail. So I think we'd like to have staff look into it and then we can, and once we decide on what we want to do with those, then, you know, it'll be a lot easier to make the policy match what we're actually enabling with service or bylaws or anything like that. Okay, so that's the motion. Is there any further discussion on this motion, Director Elliott?
Thank you, Chair. And seeing the motion, I think it covers everything quite well. And my perspective is that I don't believe I should be given a weighted vote, something we don't intend for me to have. And if I do have a weighted vote, I want to use it to best represent my electorate, as all of you would as well. And so I don't think city directors should be put in a position to try and make decisions that don't represent our electorate. And so those voting mechanisms should reflect exactly what it is we're trying to do.
Thank you for that. I appreciate those words. Director McCormick.
Yeah, thank you. A quick question. Because of time sensitivity and the fact that community works funds are going to be and, you know, upfront in our discussion over the next coming, few months, how long do you think that report would take? Would we be able to get it early in the year? Or I don't expect you to take blood out of a stone here, but I'm just saying, realistically, when might we see, so that we can base our decision-making for community works funds to match our upcoming policy?
Corporate officer.
I could probably give you a better update not today. Like, I wouldn't know. I would have to look at our work plan. That's currently, we always try to prioritize time sensitive items. There are other things that are competing right now. So I could give you TA, but not. I have to look.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you, everyone. A very good discussion, even if we're a bit convoluted. I think we are getting now onto a good track, and I think we'll get to where we are ideally wanting to go and somewhere agreeable. So any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? None opposed, carried unanimously. Very good. That brings us to question period. Is there anyone in the audience or the reporter, Mr. Galinsky, are you there still with us?
Still with you, Chair. Thank you very much. Chair, I'm wondering, and it's probably a question through the chair, about the preparatory process for draft one of the budget that was introduced today. I'm wondering what assumptions were made for the increase that has been tabled at today's meeting.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Greenan?
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Through the chair. Do you mean the assumptions? Sorry, I just want to clarify the question. So I outlined the assumptions as far as the, how we assume the prices are going to go up. Like lots of them are based on actual cost estimates that we have, or we've assumed that the costs will go up 3% to 5%. And for example, insurance, we project that it might go up 10%. Because the building values increase, the property values increase, and the market rates will push the insurance rates up. I'm not sure what other, assumptions were you asking about?
Mr. Galinsky, were you talking about the 12.59%? Is that
correct, Chair? Yes, I was talking about that.
Okay, so yeah, how is that how does the 12.59%, what does that mean exactly, I guess?
Okay, so basically what that means is staff put together basically what we think we need to operate each of those services. And in general, most of the services are going up about 5% because that's inflationary increases, the combination of inflationary increases. But there are a number of services where we need to do things that are over and above what we were doing in the past. And so those additional work plans add to the increase, the 12.59%.
I thank the manager for the response, Chair. Through the chair, it wasn't then just a process of taking last year's budget and tacking on a percentage and saying this is what it's going to be. Am I correct in that, manager?
Not at all. I'll hand it over to Ms. Greenan, but the budgets are always bottom up, and the 12.59 is, it's hard to have a single number because of course every service has its own increase or decrease on occasion, and then each electoral area and and the city of Powell River, their amounts overall across their services will go up and down. The 12.59 would be overall when you add it all up into one big number. But Ms. Greenan may have a more clear answer.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair. Yes, what Director Fall said is correct. Like, for example, the library had an 8% increase, and that is based on what they need to operate that service. And, so there are some services where we have quite a substantial decrease. But it's just based on, so no, we don't apply a simple percentage. We do zero-based budgeting. So we look at what we actually need to run each service. Each manager combs through and figures out what they need.
I thank the manager and the chair for indulging me.
You're most welcome. Is there anyone else in the audience who has questions? I don't hear any. So we don't have an in-camera, we have no in-camera session. So we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
In a bit.
Thanks, Andrew.
See you in 20 minutes.
20 minutes.
Ready?